and welcome everyone. Thank you so much for being here with us today for the sixth session of our Realities of Inequity series, where we really focus and we examine the barriers that prevent people from getting ahead, right? And from living stable, secure lives. For many, many people, right? Living in a state of uncertainty was a way of life, even long before the pandemic. I'd like to share a short video that shows the realities of the inequities they face. I think we'd all agree. These are certainly trying times. Across our state, our country, and around the world, people are trying to cope with the uncertainty and anxiety that's caused by the pandemic's impact on our lives. So now imagine what it's like living paycheck to paycheck, worrying if you'll be able to pay the rent or feed your family for that matter, or cover all the bills. Honestly, it's harrowing and it's scary. And so when we think about what this means, so as you saw in the video, right, such a stark set of data points. ALICE stands for those who are asset limited, income constrained, employed. These are workers who are essential to our economy. I'm talking about our healthcare workers, first responders, of course, grocery store and delivery service employees, receptionists, security guards, warehouse and cleaning staff, and more. They are essential to maintaining our infrastructures and the operations that allow us to navigate our lives with ease, but they can't afford the essentials like housing, food, healthcare, childcare, and transportation. So the obstacles these households face are exposed in our ALICE report. And every 2 years, we use these wonderful reports. It's a comprehensive set of reports which reveals exactly why so many Marylanders just can't get ahead. Let me give you a little context on one reason why they can't get ahead. It actually takes $87,000 for a family in Maryland to be able to pay for the basic necessities I just mentioned, like housing, food, healthcare, the essentials. But lots of people work in low-wage jobs, which dominate the employment market here in Maryland. Even with the recent minimum wage increase, you can clearly see why folks can't make ends meet. We wouldn't have this report if it wasn't for Kaiser Permanente, our very generous corporate partner in the Maryland ALICE report. We're incredibly grateful to Kaiser Permanente and all of our other partners for their support of this very important tool. And so it's a tool that we use every day, right? We use it to form our decision-making and our programs, and we share it freely with anyone in our community. And so we think about this report because it breaks down all of the things that it takes to get by in every county in our state. It's available on our website, and we encourage all of you that are participating today to read through it carefully. Now, the need for housing, for food, for help with bills, for jobs, all of these have risen dramatically in the past 11 months, as we all are aware. And we know that the pandemic has increased the need for mental health support. Calls to our 211 helpline reflect this fact. The thing with mental health is, it's not tangible, not always visible to others, or sometimes even to the person who is suffering, right? Too often, it's out of sight, out of mind. In today's discussion, we'll be casting more light on what is often hidden, right? Including the barriers that prevent people from getting the help they desperately need. So let's get started. I'd like to introduce United Way's Health Program Officer, Judy Poi, who will moderate today's session. Thank you, Judy. Go right ahead.
Thank you, Franklin. In United Way's Realities of Inequity series, we've been unpacking the barriers people face in a variety of distinct areas, like housing and childcare, internet access, and digital literacy. But mental health challenges can affect all of us. And it's been affecting more of us as this pandemic continues to drag on. It's been almost a year that we've been dealing with really big changes in our lives and the world around us. Even people who had no prior experience of a mental health issue are having a tough time coping. There's not one of us who hasn't been touched in some way by the astonishing and unsettling impact of this crisis. As Franklin said, all this is taking an even stronger toll on people who were already fighting with all they had in them, just to try to stay ahead of the bills, to make sure they or their families had a roof over their head and food on the table. And think about those who, even before COVID, were every day confronted by racial injustice and by longstanding barriers that have solidified over years and years, just to make sure they'd never get ahead. All of this uncertainty, all of this day-to-day stress, whether it's now or built up over years, can affect mental health in so many ways. So here's a question for all of you. What do you think is the most prevalent mental health disorder in our country today? Let's go ahead and take a few seconds here so that you can post your answer in the chat box. So thank you for giving us your answers. Don't be shy, go ahead and enter your, so I see depression, generalized anxiety, depression, despair, addiction. We've got some good guesses here. So here's the answer. Suicide. Anxiety disorder is the most diagnosed mental health issue in recent months. Stress, depression, anxiety, eating and substance use disorders, PTSD, all of these are on the rise. And this is all happening right now. We're seeing it in our family, in our friends, the people we work with, and maybe even in ourselves. But these issues aren't going to just magically disappear when the virus subsides, or even when the pandemic eventually ends. There will be many people who are marginalized, people whose voice and power have been diminished, who will suffer and struggle with the fallout of the pandemic for months and even years to come. United Way works day and night to make our neighbors and our neighborhoods stronger, more resilient, and healthier. We want you to know more about what we're doing and what others in our community are doing to achieve this. For today's Realities of Inequity session, we've brought together a really great group of people who will talk about the pandemic-related mental health issues that they're seeing, what they're doing to help, and what needs to change to bring hope and health to those who are suffering. And now, I'd like to introduce you to our panelists who are on the front lines of support for people in our communities and in the workplace. Please welcome Dr. Jonathan Shepard, Chief Medical Officer of Hope Health Systems and President of the Board of Directors of the Black Mental Health Alliance, Sherry Bloom, Clinical Director at the Pro Bono Counseling Project, and Jen Herwig, Vice President of Human Resources at Baltimore Gas and Electric. Thank you all for being with us here today. So let's get started. So Jonathan, first question is for you. Tell us about your work with both the Black Mental Health Alliance and Hope Health Systems and the people these organizations serve. What are some of the issues they're coming to you with as a result of the pandemic and national unrest?
Well, thank you, Judy. And I want to say welcome and good day to everyone out there. Thank you, Mr. Franklin Baker, CEO. And it is just a good day to be with you all today. So I am the Chief Medical Director of Hope Health Systems, which is a large mental health organization that is headquartered here in Baltimore and is the third largest provider of children's mental health services for the state of Maryland. And with that said, our bread and butter is treating those children who have mental health disorders. We also treat adults, and also my role as the president of the board of directors for the Black Mental Health Alliance. We are dedicated to making sure that we are promoting the wellness and the cultural sensitivity that it takes to be able to treat those of African descent, in particular African Americans, and within minority communities. So I am fortunate to be a part of both of those organizations. Hope Health Systems, for-profit organization. Black Mental Health Alliance is a non-for-profit organization. Just want to make that distinction also. But let me just answer the question of what I have seen in this pandemic. This pandemic has rocked all of us. And I sum it up in three A's, anger, anxiety, and apathy. So anger, people are angry at an all-time high. What are some of the evidence of that? If you go and call your car insurance folks, State Farm, Geico, whoever it may be, you will see that there is a large increase in the number of car accidents. That's because people are in such a rush. You would think that people are staying at home more, working at home more, but yes, even with that said, people are cutting off each other. If you drive down 695, if you live here in Maryland, you'll be amazed the number of accidents that you see, and very bad accidents. And again, anger is at an all-time high. Children are angry because their plans were canceled, proms, graduations, all the different disappointments. So people are angry. Number two, anxiety. And I'm so glad that we talked about anxiety being the most common disorder in our country. And that is a fact. It is the most common among children and adults. Again, another practical example, go to the supermarket and sneeze and watch what will happen to you if you do that. People are so anxious that they will pull you out, call the police because they think that you have coronavirus being in the supermarket. Yeah, I know y'all laughing, but it's the truth. Try it because people are on edge. They're so anxious. And so that's what I'm seeing. And the number three thing is apathy. What does apathy mean? It means lack of motivation. What has happened during this pandemic, it has stifled so many people from being able to accomplish the goals and dreams that they once had before the pandemic. And my job today is to let you know apathy should not stop you. Apathy is just a form of a disorder. It is a symptom, I should say, of disorder. And so today, hopefully this particular presentation will help remove the anger, anxiety, and apathy.
Wow, thank you for sharing that, Jonathan. It really sounds like this pandemic has been affecting people in a variety of ways. And across the age spectrum, it sounds like also as those are the folks that you were seeing. Jen, research shows that work is a leading source of stress, and stress is a potential trigger for mental illness. As a human resources professional who's worked for a number of large and leading organizations like Under Armour and Wells Fargo and T. Rowe Price, how can a decline in mental health manifest itself in the workplace? And for those who can work remotely, is it more difficult to identify warning signs in a virtual environment?
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for the opportunity to be here today to talk about this important topic. Under normal circumstances, work can be a trigger for stress and mental illness. And over the course of 2020, we saw numerous intense and really significant issues that each alone could cause really significant stress and uncertainty, and a negative impact on physical and mental health. And then when you put them all together with the compounding effect of the additional issues that we saw last year, it's really, really challenging. People have been affected by COVID, whether it's isolation or uncertainty or disruption to daily life. And then you add into that some of the issues around political strife and racial injustice and systemic racism. It's really created a tidal wave of stress and worry, and we're highly attuned to that at BGE. And so some of the things that we're doing, we have regular conversations with our employees to talk about these kinds of challenges and really understand how all of these circumstances can be impacting them and their colleagues. So raising that awareness around how they're interacting, and then also looking for some of the warning signs. So we know that our leaders need to know their employees. They need to know the baseline in terms of their behavior. Managers and leaders need to be attuned to what the normal behavior is for their employees, being in touch with them and really understanding what that could look like, whether it could be signs such as disengagement or becoming more quiet, becoming more emotional, a change in work performance or productivity, a change in their appearance or taking a lot of time off. It could even be something as simple as not showing up on video when they normally do. So it really comes down to, we have people who are working and reporting in the field and to work locations, and we have people who are reporting to work from their homes. And we have to know each other, and we have to be in touch with each other, and we have to care for one another. And that's how we're going to know what's going on and be able to support each other through this time.
Thank you, Jen. Those are really some insightful suggestions for us to think about, especially as a lot of us are working remotely. So Sherry, the next question is for you. You work with a population that is already struggling to afford basic needs and services. And at United Way, we know that the unrelenting stress of just trying to get by, not being able to keep up with the bills or afford food or heat or trying to keep a roof over your head, all of this takes an incredible toll. Tell us a little bit about the people your organization works with and how the pandemic and all the uncertainty and unrest in the world is affecting them.
Sure. And Judy and Franklin and all of United Way Central Maryland, thank you so much for having me here. I'm thrilled to be able to share this information. The mission of the Pro Bono Counseling Project is to ensure that Marylanders with limited resources that are requesting mental health care are provided access to volunteer licensed mental health professionals and other necessary supportive services. Callers reach out to us through our warm line, and that number is 443-608-9182, or they call our general Pro Bono Counseling Project number, 410-825-1001. And in their long line of hearing, no, you can't afford it, and no, we don't have a provider for you that can meet your needs, often the Pro Bono Counseling Project is their first yes. Yes, you can be connected to free mental health services. Yes, we have a provider of a certain gender, age, race, a certain style of counseling that's going to meet your needs. And again, yes, it is free. When the pandemic hit, like the rest of us on this call, Pro Bono Counseling Project was scared. In March, our phones stopped ringing. And our phones are always ringing at the Pro Bono Counseling Project. And when the phones stopped ringing, we realized that everyone was frozen with fear, just like the rest of us. There was a lot of uncertainty. When is this thing going to end? When's the world going to open back up? Providing for yourself became the highest priority. In our hierarchy of needs, mental health counseling, our wellness, those were things that went to the side. We had to provide for our families. Am I going to have my job? How am I going to put food on the table? And trauma was being experienced at an all-time high. And the thing about trauma is that if it goes unresolved, it can exacerbate and increase all those symptoms that perhaps you've had in the past. So we were talking to an awful lot of callers who were experiencing significant traumas, and their past traumas were triggered over and over again. We realized that we needed to start tracking callers who were reaching out for counseling for the very first time. And then we also wanted to look at, who's calling who's requesting counseling based upon COVID. And since July, 202 callers reported that they were seeking counseling for the first time. And a shocking 359 of our callers reported that COVID-19 was a reason they were seeking support. You know, the ongoing uncertainty of this pandemic, when will it end? We've heard things like, will I get sick? Will I die? Will my loved one die? Will my child die? It's exhausting for your mind and your body. And it can really paralyze you. And then on top of the pandemic, callers were expressing fears about the election and the political climate. A caller who identifies as a male person of color called me and said, Sherry, I just can't hide from all the media. In the past, I could turn it on, turn it off. It's everywhere. It's affecting me. It reminds me of all the struggles that I've had and perhaps all the struggles that I will have.
Thank you, Sherry, for highlighting those very real challenges that we're all facing right now with everything going on. Jonathan, there are a few studies that imply Black people are more resilient when facing significant challenges. Through the lens of your work with your patients, as well as with the Black Mental Health Alliance, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, let's see. My thoughts regarding Black people being resilient. Uh, Black people are resilient. So that is a true statement. People in general are resilient, and children are actually probably the most resilient people within our population. Black people are definitely resilient, as we have been able to withstand 400 years of prejudice, slavery. Slavery still exists today, not in the form in which we have read about it in history. But yes, anytime that you continue to suppress and oppress a group of people based off of their skin color, there is still racism and slavery existing within our communities. But yes, Black people are resilient. We're not going anywhere. We will not be going anywhere. But let me tell you also, we're not as resilient as some of those studies are saying, because we're still human beings. We're still the same people who need to be able to be treated by healthcare professionals appropriately. I have a problem when I hear Black people go in who may have sickle cell anemia, for instance, and they are not treated appropriately because their healthcare professional thinks that they are drug seeking. That is an issue, and that is a real issue and must be stopped. So I have a problem when these studies say that we're more resilient, but yet when it comes to pain and when we hurt just like anybody else, we need to be attended to. Why is a physician not giving a Black person the same amount of pain medication that he or she would give to another white counterpart? That is a problem within our society. So, you know, that particular question, those particular studies, I read with a colored lens, because yes, I'm resilient. I know who I am, but also I'm a human being and I need to be treated as such.
Thank you for sharing that, Jonathan. You're right. And there are these disparities, and they can be dangerous, especially from a health standpoint, just like you were talking about. That's why it's important that we all work to dismantle these perceptions that can be erroneous and misleading. So thank you for highlighting that. More people are experiencing mental health issues than ever before. Jen, what do you think will be the long-term impact on our workforce, and Jonathan, on our community, when so many employees are struggling with mental health challenges as a result of the pandemic?
Yeah, thanks so much. I think that the workplace has really evolved over the course of this year, and it's been evolving. And I think, no longer you can't have this mentality as an employer that, people come in, they do their work, they collect their paycheck and they leave. We're all interconnected 24/7, really. People are tied to work via their phones, and I think companies need to take more responsibility for what's going on in communities. So I think that there are a number of changes that we're going to see and continue to see and have started this year. I think companies need to be more flexible to meet the needs and the demands of work and life. We used to talk about work-life balance. It's very hard to achieve that balance. We're not achieving balance these days, especially with that ongoing, regular, kind of tethered to work way of working and communicating. We have things that we're looking at at BGE, the future state of our work and life, and how we need to be more flexible, how we can operate effectively and have alternate arrangements. And we've seen, quite frankly, that we could do that this year. We have a Workplace of the Future initiative going on at Exelon that's aimed at redesigning how we're going to work with that in mind. So bottom line is, I think companies need to be more flexible. They need to think differently about how people show up to work. We need to leverage technology, but we also need to be mindful of the impacts of that with this always connected. It can kind of extend the boundaries of the workday. And we've gotten feedback about that. So we're constantly looking for feedback from employees. And I think that's an important part of that relationship as well, as having two-way dialogue, understanding what the employee experience is, understand when we put new things in place, are there unintended consequences. Additionally, I think companies need to be really thoughtful about new and innovative benefits and offering things that are really going to round out people's overall life experience. So there are a number of things that we need to look at there, not just health benefits, but things that we're doing to support childcare and education, and just numerous ways that we look at supporting the whole person. And we've done a lot of that at Exelon and at BGE with some of the benefits that we're offering to address chronic health issues, looking at things like ergonomics. People are having to work differently now, on screen, on camera. What can that do to your eyes? So I think we just have to be more aware of how this is having a general impact. We have a high emphasis on keeping employees informed during times of crisis and change and stress. We're making sure that we have forums to get their questions, to answer their questions, providing lots of self-help sites. We can't have stagnant information. So I think companies need to be much more attuned to what people need to know, and we need to take the responsibility to provide that information. I also think partnerships with community organizations like Nami, we need to make sure that we understand the impacts of the community, because the community is, our customer, but also the community, we have people from the community that are our employees. So we need to be really well-rounded and attuned to what's going on from a mental health perspective. So navigating that with experts like the NAMI organization and United Way and other community partners is really important. And then the last thing that I'll comment on is just our workforce development initiative. So we have really still continued to grow our efforts to reach underserved communities. We're providing training and education and living wage jobs. And through that, changing lives and changing communities. So we all have to index into that in really meaningful, very deliberate and bold ways. And that's really what's going to be critical to helping, underserved communities recover from the pandemic. So one example of that is we have trainees that are coming in to through our workforce development efforts. We need to make sure that we're thoughtful about what that experience is going to be and that they're set up for success. It's not enough to provide the job. We need to make sure that while we're creating jobs and hiring people, that we have an environment that is conducive to their success, that's welcoming and it's respectful, and that people are on board with helping people be successful. And then we need to also look at some innovative ways of how we bring people on from different situations. So that may be different pre-boarding, that could be partnership with different community groups so that we can provide different training and support and coaching and performance kind of monitoring to make sure that people can be successful. So I think we just have to be more holistic, more end-to-end, more empathetic. Those are the things that companies need to do, changing starting now.
Thank you, Jen. And Jonathan, what do you see as the long-term impacts to the community?
Yeah, our community is going to be tremendously impacted. I'm going to highlight in particular Black women. I have been on this mantra of lifting the Black woman, and I join in with the New York Times, who just wrote an expose, if you would, just last week about how the pandemic has affected mothers. And they said something that was so key, and that is mothers are not burned out, they're betrayed. They have been betrayed and not burned out. What do you mean by betrayed? There have been 4,637,000 women who lost payroll jobs since the pandemic struck. And 30% of those women between the ages of 25 to 44 lost it because childcare is the main reason for unemployment. That is horrendous. 48% of Black mothers who said that the pandemic has had a major effect on their ability to pay for necessities such as housing, utilities, and food. And we just heard that in the video that I played just much earlier. I'll just highlight just a couple other things. 69% of mothers with partners who say that they are chiefly responsible for child care compared to 24% of fathers. So what am I getting at? Is that the pandemic has definitely exposed the disparities that continue to exist in between men and women, and in between, in particular, Black women, who are a major force of the labor population within our population. And so now we have seen how the COVID-19 pandemic has disproportionately affected Blacks. And so you were wondering why, because the Blacks, we can't stay at home. Only 18% of Blacks can stay at home. So now it has drastically affected the workforce because they're trying to decide between, do they care for their children or their family, or do they live and be able to go out and provide for food, housing, necessities, the ones that I just mentioned. So it is just an atrocity right now, what this pandemic has done to us. And so I understand, again, the anger, anxiety, apathy. So all these things are a perfect recipe of what we're seeing right now. What I'm hoping is that as we move forward under this new administration, the federal government, that will be able to alleviate some of those burdens. And let me tell you, it's not on the federal government. We must hold our state government officials accountable, our local government officials accountable. At every single stage, we must make sure that they are fighting for the working family. I am disturbed by these statistics. I'm sitting here writing. If you see me writing, that's because when I love stats and I'm eating it up all today. I'm disturbed that it takes that amount of money to raise a family of 4 in Maryland, and that only 61%, well, not I should say only, but 61% of the jobs in Maryland, people earn less than $20 an hour. That is a crying shame. And yet people are fighting against raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour. Something's wrong with this picture, you all. And so we must continue with the fight.
Thank you. Thank you, Jonathan and Jen. It's clear from what you both just shared that the fallout from the pandemic is going to be with us for years. And at United Way, we provide what's needed, where it's needed. And we've been out in the community helping people cope with and deal with the impact of what COVID's been doing in their lives. We know that awareness is the first step to confronting challenges and an important step in addressing your mental health. Our case managers are meeting virtually with residents in South Baltimore's Brooklyn Curtis Bay neighborhood and giving them a safe space to talk about what's going on and how it's affecting them. We're giving out information and materials in the neighborhoods that we serve so that people can learn about the warning signs of stress and tips to combat them, how to address this through mindfulness activities like using stress balls or coloring books, and to shift their focus away from their worries and their anxieties. And adding to our frontline support is an amazing partnership with Pro Bono Counseling Project and United Way's 211 helpline. The 211 helpline is a free and confidential service, and it is available 24 hours a day, every single day of the year. Callers may be in a crisis or could be calling because they need help finding food or housing or paying their bills, and that can affect them emotionally. Trying to keep a roof over your head or just trying to get by is incredibly stressful. And that's where Pro Bono Counseling comes in. So we're going to share a quick video with you right now to show you how this partnership works.
211 Maryland, this is Valerie. May I help you?
Yes, ma'am. I have rent coming up, and I'm worried. I just don't know what to do. Just exhausted. I've been trying to lower rent. It's too high here. I'm not going to be able to afford it. I'm sorry. It's just so much.
Yeah, that's okay. It's pretty stressful. You know, another thing, this has nothing to do with finances, but, you know, if you need somebody to talk to, there's a phone counseling program that you might find useful called the Pro Bono Counseling Project, if you want that number.
Okay.
I'll have that for you in just a second.
Well, thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Yeah, you take good care. And if other questions come up, feel free to give us a call back, okay?
Hi there, good afternoon. My name is Mike. I'm calling you back from 211 Maryland, United Way Helpline.
Hi, yes. I was calling to see if I could get some information on some assistance that I could receive.
Okay, I'd be happy to take a look and see what programs are available.
I'm already so deep in a hole, in debt, that even when I get that money, I'm not even going to see it.
Right.
I owe, some of my family, some of my friends. I had to sell, some of my stuff and my kids' stuff to try to make ends meet. And Lord,
Yeah, here at the 211 United Way, we've recognized mental health, the stress that this puts on everyone. There is a free counseling line that we have, and you can call it at any time just to talk. It really, I find it helpful for myself to because when I listen to someone else what they're going through, I'm like, wow, I get strength from their story. I'm getting strength from you right now, just hearing how you're still making it through. It makes me realize wow, this is a strong person.
We get some pretty powerful calls to 211. Sherry, can you quickly tell us a little bit about the Pro Bono Counseling Partnership and what are some of the typical calls that your team responds to?
Sure, and thank you for sharing that powerful video. We all heard the first caller say, "I'm exhausted." And that's really reflective of the calls that we receive. Anyone can call the warm line if they're looking for shorter term interventions, someone to talk to, they're feeling stressed out, anxious, depressed, they're just feeling out of sorts, they can call the warm line. And what's great about the warm line is we don't ask for income verification. We don't ask social security status. And it really removes barriers for a lot of callers that have experienced those roadblocks before. And then if callers want longer term counseling, they can call Pro Bono Counseling Project. And again, we don't ask for income verification. We don't ask for social security income verification. In 2020, 550 of 1,300 callers were actually below the poverty line, meaning they actually reported that they made under $10,000 a year. Typical callers are experiencing multiple traumas. We talked about that before. We've had callers talk about being depressed over a long period of time after losing their job. Folks calling because they're experiencing domestic violence before they would have reached out earlier, but they're stuck at home and they don't have a confidential spot to talk in, how hopeless they must feel. And frontline workers who are seeking support to cope with multiple losses, grieving with patients, grieving with families, and not being able to even hug their own children.
Thank you for that, Sherry. And so just briefly then, how does being satisfied with your therapist and their ability to empathize with your life situation affect treatment success?
Sure. So the greatest predictor of client success is actually the fit between the caller and the clinician and the therapist providing the counseling. We actually ask callers how they identify their race, how do they identify their gender, and we actually ask callers, what would be a really good fit for you? And we are able to match callers who are requesting specific clinicians of certain ages, races, gender, style of counseling. And I think that's really important. We had a recent caller, a trans person of color, and they said to me, Sherry, I've had therapists in the past and it just doesn't work. And I said to that caller, have you ever been asked what kind of therapist you want to see? And they said, no, it's just been another letdown. You're actually the first organization that has asked me what would actually be helpful. So, every caller is treated individually, uniquely, and we look at them from a holistic lens.
Thank you. And so just real quick, like what are a couple of warning signs that someone should seek help and and that they're in distress?
Sure. So if someone is experiencing sadness or loneliness, they're not able to function in the usual kind of capacity that they're able to, that's a great reason to reach out. And again, they can call the warm line. It's answered between 10 a.m. and 6 p.m. Monday through Friday. And they can call the Pro Bono Counseling Project Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. And if it's after those hours, they can always leave a message and we'll connect them to counseling services.
These are important things to keep an eye out for. Thank you, Sherry.
Sure.
Jen, as an employer, what are some existing and new supports you're providing to BG&E, not only to address the mental health of your employees, but also to help ease these burdens in other areas of their life that can increase stress or anxiety or depression or other issues? Can you give us just a couple of examples?
Sure. Just a couple of examples that we've provided. One thing that we introduced last year and has gotten a lot more emphasis this year is that we have an individual on board who is a counselor for mental health issues and for physical health issues. And she is available. She's fully funded by BGE. She's available to every employee, and she will take calls, and she will kind of have she will partner with someone through the course of putting things in place to resolve some of their issues or to drive accountability for them around, it could be things like even weight loss or other chronic health issues. So she's been wonderful. She also does things proactively to offer programs and education around reinforcing strategies for managing self-care and how to seek help and understanding what resources available, because sometimes there's so much information that you can't weed through it. So she's been really supportive in that. We also are doing things to encourage people to take time away from work, taking those health days. Even if we can't travel and go on vacation, just being able to take a day away from work and away from some of those demands, I think can be useful. So we're doing a lot to encourage that, and not just say take a day, but sometimes people feel like the nature of the work and the demands of the work make it hard to get away. So we have to do more to lean in to say, all right, we're going to cover this, we're going to cover that, and get people to take that time away. I think that's really, really essential to just being able to reset, and also even being able to take time to address some of life's demands. And then we've also offered some enhanced benefits, like I spoke about earlier. We offered crisis childcare benefits and things like that. And then we've had people who have had just personal issues. We had someone who had a house fire, or we've had different things that have come along, and we have vacation donation programs and various ways that will support people through those times of crisis as well. So that's just a few that I would share.
Thanks for sharing those great examples, Jen. I have another question for you. So unconscious bias, microaggressions, and underrepresentation of minority groups in the workplace, these can all cause stress and anxiety. How can employers address these? Can you give us a couple of examples?
Sure. And I couldn't agree more. I think that's something that's so vital for us to be plugged into and to really be dismantling. So we're doing a number of things right now. One of them is we stood up an initiative last summer. It's called RISE. It's for a racially inclusive, safe, and equitable workplace. And it has 3 work streams. There's a work stream that's dedicated to the work that we'll do externally with partnerships with communities, community organizations, also government, and looking at legislation, influencing new legislation and new policy, new public policy. So a number of things are workforce development, that's kind of funneled through that work stream. And then we have 2 work streams that are really dedicated to what you're talking about there, which is, really educating people on micro inequities and unconscious bias and how that works its way into the workplace and has really negative repercussions for people. So we have one work stream that's dedicated to culture, and we're rolling out a lot of training and awareness, and we're also having sessions where we're having listening sessions with people to get feedback on what the employee experience is. We'll pull together action plans coming out of that. So I do think feedback from employees is one of the first steps so that we can understand what's actually happening. And then the last piece is a work stream called How We Work. And that is something where we're looking at every aspect of our business. We're looking at our practices, our ways of working, how decisions are made, and it's through the racial equity lens. And so it looks to see what enablers or barriers exist in our ways of working. We're a 200-plus-year-old company. There are things that, we formed a culture over that time. We formed ways of working over that time. Certainly some things have evolved, but we still have work to do. So RISE is a huge part of our efforts at BGE. There are other things as well, but that's one that I would just share here.
Thank you so much for Jen. It's great to hear about the proactive approach that you're taking at BG&E to address these issues. So, Jonathan, tell us about existing barriers in mental health care that can affect vulnerable communities. What are a couple of ways that these barriers can be broken down?
Yeah, unfortunately, there are barriers that prevent people from getting mental health care. One of the things that I have highlighted in my research and studies is that during the pandemic, they released the restrictions regarding telehealth services. So prior to the pandemic, telehealth services had to occur with the person outside of their home, potentially at the office or at another site. But you could not bill for telehealth services if a person was at home. Makes no sense. So if you're trying to make sense of it, it doesn't make sense. All right. And then also, you could not get paid at the same level of seeing a person face to face as you would with telehealth services. Again, doesn't make any sense. If I'm providing the same type of services, why is there a level of reimbursement difference? That doesn't make any sense. So thankfully that these restrictions were eased up. But however, legislation needs to occur to make sure that these restrictions that once used to be, that we don't go back to that. Let me tell you, if we go back to that, providers will not be happy. The consumer will not be happy. Even the satisfaction surveys that have been done have shown that people are actually even more pleased with telehealth services in certain specialties now. But in regarding to mental health, they are actually very satisfied with how that particular platform is being used in providing for services. So we must do a better job. I must also mention, people talk a lot about stigma and how Black people, they're stigmatized or utilize stigma to not go seek services. Well, let me tell you something. More research has been done, and we need to stop saying so much about stigma, because stigma is getting better. More and more Blacks are acceptance of mental health care. But guess what the number one reason why people are not getting mental health care within the Black communities, and really as people as a whole? It's cost. In this country, it makes no sense that healthcare is tied into your employment benefits. Again, our country is backwards when it comes to healthcare. Healthcare is a right, not a privilege. And so we must continue to fight for that. If I have EAP and they tell me I only have 5 sessions because I'm depressed, how do I know whether or not am I going to be better after 5 sessions? Who determines that? Again, we must do a better job. And how do we do that? We have to hold the government officials who we elect. Stop worrying about so much about the federal government. Yes, we need to, they will take care of themselves, but guess who's making these decisions? Your state government officials and your local government officials. So you need to make sure that you know who these people are so that you can influence those pieces of legislation. And actually, they're going on right now. The Maryland legislative branches are in branch is in session right now. You need to call them up, find out. There's a lot of important bills that are going on that relate to mental health care. It has nothing to do with the federal government. All right. Everybody wants to talk about the White House. Find out what's going on in our state house so that we can make sure that we're fighting for equity, not equality, but equity. There's a difference for all people who have mental health issues. And a shameless plug. I have a podcast, all right? I said shameless plug, right? And so in this pandemic, it has caused me to be able to provide services through this podcast. And so at the end of this, I believe we'll be able to give you some information about that. But that's my job, my little contribution that I'm making to the community to make sure that we have these services in place.
Thank you, Jonathan. It sounds like there's some really deep work to do, and we appreciate you sharing those resources and that information for folks. So to springboard off of this, I'd like to share a message from Jeff Garrett, who's an advocate for those who are homeless and who talks about the issues he and others face.
Hi, my name is Jeff Garrett. I've been teetering with homelessness my whole life, although I actually became homeless 5 years ago here in Baltimore. Um, my untreated mental health issues had really taken their toll on me. Traumas throughout my entire life, left untreated, had really kind of compounded um, and left me a shell of a human being, ill prepared for uh, my life at that time. Um, Fortunately, when I became homeless, I was connected to services such as Baltimore Crisis Response and Healthcare for the Homeless. Um, they were able to uh, a find out exactly what was going on with me. Um, we were able to find a medication that actually worked for me, and it also inspired me to become more aware of myself and to take ownership of my mental health issues and my life in general, and to take ownership. So I spent a lot of time at this period in the library, not just studying major depression and PTSD, but also other social issues that I was living through, in particular homelessness, the socio and economic impacts of them, the racial disparities. Face to face is no longer um, the norm, and that's one of the biggest issues is going to come forward. I think for us moving forward in this COVID era, is there is no going back, and I think everyone's trying to get back to normal. And I think today we're living in the new normal, and we need to learn to go forward, and we can't try to go backwards. And so that's the message that I'd like to bring to everyone is COVID has given us a great excuse now to scrap all the things that weren't working properly, and let's redevelop them in a way post-COVID that actually works and works well for everyone. My name is Jeff. Thank you.
To Jeff's point, things have completely changed now. And I've noticed that people and the media are talking more openly about mental illness and its effects. But there is still stigma. Sherry tells us about how, Sherry, can you tell us just briefly how this affects not only those who are suffering, but those they interact with, like their family or their friends or their work colleagues? And then Jen, can you also just briefly let us know how we can dismantle this stigma in the workplace so that people feel like mental illness is not something that needs to be hidden? Sherry, you can.
Unfortunately, stigma can prevent people from reaching out, and it becomes isolating, and that can lead to depression and anxiety. And as Jeff in the video mentioned, compounded traumas. Before the pandemic hit, Pro Bono Counseling Project, we were out and about, a lot of community events, and community members would come up to me and say, well, Sherry, that Pro Bono Counseling Project, and that sounds great, but people in my community are not going to take you up on this offer. They're just not going to do counseling. And I would come back and say, it's so interesting. About 70% of actually our callers identify as Black, Indigenous, and people of color. 15% of our callers are actually identifying as Latino and Latina. And then I say 10% of our people that reach out to us actually speak a language other than English as their primary language. And gender diverse clients actually are about 1% of our callers. So then I would say, you might want to take a card. Maybe you know someone that might want some counseling. So I think talking about who's actually reaching out and seeking services, that could help too.
So I'll add just in terms of what's happening in the workplace. I think a lot of this comes down to education and awareness and having the conversation. We had, for instance, last year, we have a diversity, equity, and inclusion annual week-long event. We didn't let the pandemic stop us from doing that. We had all virtual offerings this year, and we had a panel on mental health issues. Several experts joined us, aiming to bring greater awareness and promote advocacy for people who are suffering from mental illness. So that was one thing that we did. We provided supplemental and reference resources for people. So I think that education piece is really important. And then also I would add that I mentioned before partnerships with Nami, and Nami is this year's cause initiative for BGE. And so what that means is each year we select one nonprofit to focus on our fundraising efforts above and beyond what we continue to do through other grants or other nonprofit support or other community initiatives. So for NAMI, there's going to be a 5K, a golf tournament, lots of other fundraisers to support that cause. And this will be an opportunity for us to talk about those mental health issues with employees, better understand, and also get them, very much on board with being a part of resourcing and supporting the cause.
Thank you, Jen and Sherry. That was great information and recommendations. There are certainly many challenges that need to be overcome so that people can get the help and the support that they need, and to reduce and hopefully eliminate the stigma that's associated with mental illness. These are daunting tasks that we've talked about today. So I want to ask, what gives each of you hope? What keeps you going? And this is really for those who are attending, as well as our panelists. So go ahead and enter your thoughts in the chat box. And for our panelists, I would like to ask each of you to share with us what gives you hope and what you are doing personally to help break down the barriers that we talked about today. If you could each just give us like a quick 30-second, what gives you hope and what you're doing. Sherry, let's start with you.
Sure. For me, it's 2 words: access and connection. When callers began reaching out to us, they would say, Sherry, how are you doing? They would ask all of the staff at Pro Bono, how are you doing? They didn't want to just ask it in a very casual way. They wanted to know how we're doing, making connections. They were feeling lonely and isolated. And I wanted to mention that we had the largest number of enrollment of our volunteer therapists than we ever had during the pandemic. We had over 125 clinicians enroll from March to December, and usually in a year we get 100. So they're providing access to callers who otherwise wouldn't have it, and people are reaching out, and that gives me hope.
That's great. Thank you. Jen, how about you?
Yeah, I would say what gives me hope is that, we're making progress, that we have accountability in organizations and really humanity. I think that COVID, while it was and continues to be an extraordinary challenge, I think it has opened our eyes to numerous issues that are impacting each other in our communities, and certainly some of our underserved communities. It raises our awareness to these really important issues. So what gives me hope is the awareness, the discussion, the focus on doing something about it. I'm really proud to work for a company like BGE that's willing to go in there and work these issues, and as you said, proactively working on this right now and driving accountability. And then in terms of something that I'm doing, I would say I'm probably spending half my day every day working on issues of equity. It's the most important work that I'll do, and everything that I'm doing from a human resources perspective is through that lens. And I'm really working on driving the change that we need at BGE. I think there are things that are wonderful about our company, and I think that there are things that we need to adjust and evolve. And I'm personally very committed to making those changes myself and with the company.
Thank you, Jen. And Jonathan, we'll wrap up with you. What gives you hope?
30 seconds here. GRR.
30 seconds. We got it.
Grit, responsibility, and resiliency. Courage. I had to be responsible. And I have to know that when I go through something, I can bounce back. When I bounce back, I don't bounce back where I fell off. I bounce back at a higher level. And so that's what gives me hope. And no, we will get through this pandemic. This pandemic will end.
Yes, it will. Thank you so much. Thank you all for sharing that. It gives me hope to listen to all of you and to know that this great work is happening in the community, that Jonathan, you're working to break down those barriers, and Sherry on the front lines, and Jen setting the policies and improving the workplace. It gives me hope to hear all of this and to know that we can all do that and be a part of this during this time to respond to the need in our community. And so right now, I want to ask Franklin, what lifts you up these days? What gives you hope?
Well, I am so heartened by the hard work of the United Way staff, our volunteers, and our supporters who really help us, right? Provide what's needed, where it's needed, especially during this pandemic, as you all just discussed, to really address so many needs, including mental health. So that gives me a lot of hope. And thank you, Jonathan, Sherry, and Jennifer, for really, honestly, such a great discussion today. If anyone has any questions for our panelists or an idea to share perhaps, or their contact information here is on the slide, and we'll share it in our follow-up email as well, of course, to all those who are interested in contacting them directly. So be sure to look out for that. As you heard today, our 211 helpline is truly, right, a lifeline for those who are struggling. And today, obviously, is February 11th, or as we call it, 211 Day. And so every year, we recognize, we celebrate, we laud our 211 team, who each day in the trenches answering hundreds of calls for help. Call volume obviously has absolutely skyrocketed since the pandemic hit, and we need your support. You can help answer the call for help with a donation directly to our 211 helpline. Your gift means that we can continue to help people with housing, food, bills, and so much more, as well as the mental health support and the services, the wraparound services that you heard about today. Thank you so much to our panelists. And thank you so much for joining us today. Stay safe, remain healthy, enjoy your time out in the snow if you'd like to. We thank you so much for joining us today.
United we stand, united we are, the responders to the call. Together we hope, together we dream. We're a strong and mighty team. We will face every challenge with our heart, our hands, our will. United we stand, united we are, united we can.